Good morning, everyone. Is there anyone here that I need to persuade that climate change is a terribly serious problem? Didn't think so. Is there anyone that thinks that we're moving fast enough to deal with that problem? No. So I could then skip through a whole bunch of slides. So we know that at the moment globally we're headed towards about 3-4 degrees, at least in this century, of warming. And we know that the safe limit that governments are shooting for is 2 degrees. And we know that an awful lot of people think that limit is too high and that we should be shooting for 1.5 degrees. So what's the gap between where we're headed and where we need to be? What do you think some of the really, really key obstacles are? Anyone want to shoot out just a couple of quick ideas here? Big oil? Big coal? Big gas? Basically, the sort of huge problem that we face is that we're in a world where we have enormous vested interests caught up in fossil fuels. And these fossil fuels, if we need to keep of the reserves that currently exist, the fossil fuel reserves that exist in the world, I think that it's something like, if they were burnt, they would amount to 2,795 gigatons of carbon dioxide. But if we want to stay below the safe limit of 2 degrees of warming, we can only afford to burn 565 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So what that means economically is that there are all these companies out there, fossil fuel companies, who have these enormous reserves that they have a huge vested interest in burning, and we need to stop them from burning those reserves. So how do we do this? And by the way, there are a whole lot of other problems with fossil fuels, of course. Not least the influence that they have on our democracies, particularly in the United States, where enormous amounts of money goes from fossil fuel companies to people in Congress and to distorting the debate on climate change through producing disinformation. Companies have literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 10 to 15 years creating this illusion of a debate about climate change that you have still in some quarters. And at the same time, the playing field is not nearly level when it comes to the development of renewable energy technologies, because the subsidies that still go to fossil fuels around the world are gigantic, absolutely gigantic. The subsidies that we have, if we were doing the same thing, would be going to renewable energy, the technology that we have. But the subsidies that are going to renewable energy remain a small fraction of what's going to fossil fuels. So I'm a graduate of UCT. I've got a lot of friends and colleagues at UCT, and at the beginning of November last year, we got together, some of us, and wrote a letter to the university saying, UCT has a huge 2 billion rand endowment. What proportion of that, please tell us, is invested in fossil fuels? And will you take steps to start reducing that investment in fossil fuels? And the university's response, being a bureaucracy and being sort of very resistant, we had to keep sort of pushing and pushing and pushing. But we had a meeting with their finance director in March this year, and they told us that they're starting to look into this issue. They're talking to their joint investment committee, the management committee that sort of deals with the university finances, and they're starting now to look at this issue. In the meantime, we're going ahead with developing a campaign on campus, and we are going to be having a launch for that campaign at UCT on the 30th of July. Just to give you some background, this is part of an international campaign that started in the United States, started in colleges from the United States. You've probably heard of 350.org. Who's heard of 350.org? So 350.org and Bill McKibben launched this campaign in the United States a couple of years ago. The whole concept of disinvestment, by the way, has particular resonance for us here in South Africa, because it was a disinvestment campaign in the late 1980s and early 1990s that was responsible in very large part for putting significant additional pressure on the apartheid government to sort of bring an end to the apartheid regime and to start democracy. But this disinvestment campaign, this campaign for fossil fuel disinvestment, is actually going faster than any previous disinvestment campaign in history. And there have been past campaigns for alcohol and tobacco and so forth. Globally, some of the biggest companies that are implicated in this problem of continuing to mine fossil fuels are companies that have a big footprint in South Africa, like Anglo American and BHP Billiton. So there's a growing wave of support for disinvestment around the world. Faculty of the University of Harvard, many of the faculty of the University of Harvard, Jim Young Kim, the president of the World Bank, Christiana Figueres, the executive secretary of the UNFCCC, which is behind all the negotiations on climate change. And recently, just a few weeks back, President Barack Obama was speaking in California and about climate change, and he said to students and faculty at the University of California in Irvine, you need to invest in what helps and divest from what harms. And a couple of months ago as well, Archbishop Tutu said in an editorial in The Guardian and published in other places, we need to divest from fossil fuels. People of conscience need to break their ties with corporations financing the injustice of climate change. Very, very strong, clear call. So, Norway has this gigantic fund that they built up from fossil fuels, which they're now looking at diverting away from fossil fuels. Many, many colleges, institutions, churches, and cities in the United States are now starting to make this move. And investors increasingly are also starting to look at ways to get money out of fossil fuels. So what you can do, whatever campus you're on, link up with 350, with the Go Fossil Free campaign, gofossilfree.org campaign. Look for resources there. Start a movement on your particular campus. Start a campaign in any particular institution that you may be associated with which has investments. If you're part of a church that has an investment fund of some kind, raise this issue. Where is the money, and why are we investing in activities that are going to destroy the future? So, thank you very much indeed. I'll be around today. If anyone wants to talk to me later or ask questions or connect up, by all means. Thanks.
Thank you.